This is Paul Murray Live.
Thank you, King. Look forward to seeing you again tomorrow night. The games are over. The distractions are done. All eyes on Paul Murray Live tonight, and we've got a medal-worthy group for you tonight. Senator Pauline Hanson and Rowan Dean are here to kick us off. Nicole Flint and Jacinta Price will join us for their common sense conservatism a little bit later. John Barilaro will give us the insight about what is next when it comes to slowly but surely getting out of lockdown, and where is that 24-hour vaccine centre? We'll ask him, and of course the great Senator Jim Molan, who's had plenty to say about Australia's rather dodgy history when it comes to buying equipment to defend the country. But first, at a time when so many of us are locked down and so many of us have been heartbroken by the lockdowns, while I don't like to say it this way, there really is no other way to put it than this, that we have to take the little victories when we get them, and slowly but surely the logic that I've been trying to present here for months is now starting to seep into those that are making decisions. Every single night I told you about how the most recent lockdown in Victoria did not need to be statewide, just like the one before that and so many before. Thankfully, today, decision made that we knew from day one. Regional Victoria needed to be freed.
Regional Victoria will be released from these lockdown measures.
Also, a localised approach is the best way to handle things in Greater Sydney. Now, we've got some new technology, a fancy new map to show you tonight, exclusive to this program. Nobody else can steal it. But let me show you here about the three different zones that I'm going to talk about here, okay? We're going to be talking about a red zone, a slightly less red zone, and then pink zones. Put simply, these are the areas of Greater Sydney that have the problem. They are all locked in that southwest. That's where the hundreds of cases are. That's where every day you're getting the announcements about where the problems are. Now, areas that have 10 or fewer mystery cases, well, let's have a look at that map right now as well, because you can see to the north of the city and to the south of the city, the intensity of this thing is nowhere near what you would see in other parts of the city. And places where there are zero mystery cases, where they have to let their kids go to school, well, they all seem to be clumped nowhere near southwestern Sydney. And you have a look at places like Hunters Hill, Willoughby, North Sydney, Mossman, all of those zero mystery cases. Their kids have to go back to school. Also, what about the Hawkesbury? What about Hornsby? Again, in the far north, and in the far south, poor little Shell Harbour. Shell Harbour, just south of Wollongong, has been in lockdown for 7 weeks and has never shown signs of being a massive COVID outbreak. Their kids must go back to school. Now, I get it. When I talk about this three-phase system, I'm not talking about that people in Hornsby and Hawkesbury should be able to go and hang out at each other's houses and go and sink a few tins at the pub. And if so, of course, you make the most of Wingman Beer, the sponsors of this program. But I'm suggesting the basics. More people being able to go back to work and kids going back to school. Where we will learn today that when the vaccination rates hit the magical numbers of 50% for first jab and then eventually 70% for double dose, well then lockdowns will be localised. In the meantime, the pressure will come off localised areas. Again, the logic we've been talking about through the entirety of the pandemic. Where there's a problem, lock it down hard. But where there's no mystery cases, let the kids go back to school.
You will look to easing restrictions?
Well, the other thing that health experts will look at is where the concentration of cases are occurring. And at this stage, the concentration of cases, whilst we've had outbreaks or clusters exist outside those areas, the concentration of cases is not in dispute at the moment. We know where the extra concentration is.
Now, they're little wins in logic. But once you can move people from no logic at all to a little bit of logic, logic has this incredible power of growing and growing until eventually it actually takes over. It's not a virus, it's freedom. And it's something that people in those areas that do not have the same burden as others should be able to experience. If the cases go up, then so do the restrictions. But the idea of one size fits all, not okay. 7 weeks in. Of course, I'm not forgetting what's happening in Melbourne, and we'll show you similar stories again tomorrow night about the intensity of things happening right now in Melbourne. But also, it's important, as always, to note that there's not just COVID. It's not just COVID that people get crook from, and it's not just COVID that kills people. Every year, thousands of Australian women and men end up getting breast cancer. Too many of those people end up dying. While the vast majority do end up getting treatment, anyone who's ever had that fear of a lump in their breast knows how important it is to make sure that things like breast scanning takes place. Well, today we learn that breast screening has been shut down in parts of Greater Sydney. So put simply, there will be a woman who, tomorrow morning, will discover a lump, and it will be harder for her to be able to go and get a breast screen, which means when eventually they can, that lump might get bigger. The bigger it gets, the harder it is to fight. This, just like kids in schools and kids being kept in homes full of abuse, is completely unacceptable. I'll raise it with the Deputy Premier in a few minutes' time. As for the way out of it, we all know that it's about those vaccination numbers. 50% for the first jab will help ease some of the restrictions, particularly in Greater Sydney. We don't know if that's going to be the situation in Melbourne. And we know that 70% of every state, as well as the country, is the way for lockdowns to be allegedly something of the past. So where do we sit right now when it comes to the vaccination rollout? We'll give you this number each and every night as well. More than 1 million in the past few days, which has been awesome. First dose, 44% of the Australian population. That's good. That means eventually the second dose will get there, but it's about 2 to 1 at the moment of those that have had one, but not two. 13 million doses have been handed out thus far. And the messaging has changed and changed for the better. The federal government is now starting to use language people understand about the size of the number of people who are getting the jab every week. Here's the Health Minister.
1.33 million vaccinations in the last week. And as the PM said, that's almost the population of Adelaide. It's the population of Canberra, Newcastle, Geelong, together. It gives you a sense of what's being achieved.
Hope. Hope is what's needed. That's why we talk about the different grades of what's happening in Sydney. It's why regional Victoria needed to come out. It's why people need to understand that, yes, not enough, but we are starting to tick off big population centres every single week, adding those that have taken the jab towards freedom. And another vaccine will be on its way. 10 million doses of it will be fully available by the end of the year, and that means we will supercharge. It's called the Moderna vaccine and was approved today in Canberra.
The first 1 million doses is on track to arrive next month and will go to pharmacies. Then we will have 3 million in October, 3 million in November, and 3 million in December. This is another important tool that we have in our battle against COVID. We'll have it in our hands and we'll have the jabs in our arms starting next month.
Now, obviously, we'd love all those numbers to be better, but I want to try to get back to hope because we have been broken, we have been battered, and we will occasionally take one step back. But just like all adversity, there's only one way Australians deal with it. 1 foot in front of the other. Sometimes it'll be a millimetre, sometimes it'll be a couple of metres. We'll take those steps with you. Let's all hold hands and do it each and every night. Now, I want to give you an insight into what is happening right now when it comes to the economy. Now, understandably, with lockdowns that are hard in Greater Sydney and, of course, in Melbourne, and ones that have come and gone in places like Queensland, we would, of course, all be bracing for a huge problem when it comes to unemployment. But I want to show you some data that came out today. It's not the only data that's around, and it's, of course, a picture that could be better. But I want to show you where Australia's payroll sits right now compared to where we were at the worst of things last year. We're basically back where we were in February. The ABS puts together statistics of what people get paid every fortnight. Now, yes, that number has fallen by about 4%, and that's the most dramatic in New South Wales, down by about 2% in Victoria. But it also shows here that part of the payments which are being pumped through by state and federal government is starting to work and is starting to hold people in place. Is it enough? No. Could it be worse? You betcha. Remember, Australia going into the pandemic had just about 13 million people in employment. At the start of this year, when we thought we were on the backside of the pandemic, more than 13 million people had a job. We'll find out whether the unemployment figures back up the picture that's being painted today by the ABS that, yes, there's a downturn, but it is not the crater that you can see in the middle of your screen from the middle of last year. Here's the PM selling the story of the economy today.
Because this is the difference between Australia and the rest of the world. The rest of the world has not seen the very low fatality rates that we've seen in this country. They have not seen the economic recovery, by and large, that we have in this country. They have not seen the very low case numbers. So we're going for the trifecta. We're going for low case numbers. We're going for low fatality rates, and we're going for a vaccinated country.
All right, 10 minutes, COVID, done. There's other stuff that's worth talking about tonight, including if you own property, do you have the right about who can come onto that property? Well, you would think yes. If you own a farm, can people turn up and start camping on the edges of that farm? You would think not. But in the Socialist Republic of Victoria, that's exactly what they're going to let thousands of people do. People who own farms that back onto riverfront will have to let people access their farms and set up camp by the sides of the rivers that help feed the farms. It's an extraordinary decision. One that affects certain parts of Victoria, but affects the types of farmers that I think are worth talking about here. Now, some of them have decided to go to state parliament and to protest. They're protested here because, in part, 27 different locations around the northern part of Victoria will be affected by this. We're talking about 27 areas along the Goulburn, Broken, Owens, Campsite, Loddon and Murray rivers will be open to camping. So put simply, somebody who is not a member of your family and is not a friend will be able to set up a campsite on your land. Some of the farmers speaking today to the ABC said this. Now, there's no explanation, by the way, about how these camping bookings are going to work or how camper behaviour is going to be managed. Can you boot somebody off your land? Where do they go to the toot? The government has said that hundreds of sites will follow after a consultation process that resulted in 1,100 submissions. Submissions from farmers like Lynn, who said, "We have been uninformed from the beginning. We have been treated with no respect." There's another farmer again, Lynn continues. "This amendment makes our business totally unworkable and we've become the sacrificial lamb to the leisure vote." So in the Socialist Republic of Victoria, someone can camp out on your land who you don't invite to be there. Will you be compensated for it? There seems to be no plan for that whatsoever. This is ridiculous. But you and I live in the real world, and wherever the chairman lives, they just can do what they want. Because remember, they were going to have community consultation about those dirty big power lines which were going to go from renewable energy plants over Ballarat. And of course, the farmers said they didn't want them. But because people in Melbourne wanted to feel better about renewable energy, it didn't matter. The compensation that will be offered to those farmers isn't for the dirty big power lines that go over the top of their crops that grow, among other things, potatoes, for things like McCain's. No, they'll only be compensated for the bits of the towers that hold up the power lines. Welcome to Chairman Dan's Victoria, regional Victoria. You've just been freed from lockdown, but we have to wait till next year's election to be freed from Dan. Meantime, to a story out of Brisbane. This is a bloke who has pled guilty to extinguishing the eternal flame in Brisbane. His name, Timothy Warburton. A prosecutor said that this bloke was filmed using a piece of clothing to extinguish the flame before he raised his arms in celebration, and the video was uploaded to Instagram by a co-accused. Apparently, he was full as a goog. Excuse was, of course, drunkenness. He was full of apologies today when it came to the court, and then this business happened outside the court.
We're just giving you an opportunity here, Timothy, to say a big sorry to the thousands of soldiers.
A big sorry to the thousands of soldiers. There.
Well, you're just repeating my question. So are you going to say sorry? Are you going to apologise?
Did I just do that? Have I not been to court for that? Get the out my face.
Classy stuff. In the past couple of hours, and we'll give you more details on this tomorrow when we've had a chance to read it, but the IPCC, the UN climate change report is out, is clear that humans are the cause of global warming and all of its effects around the world. In fact, the IPCC report has suggested that the climate change threat has got worse over the past 14 years. Now, for those that are half paying attention, I've never not said that climate change is not an obvious consequence of billions of people living here and multiple industrial ages, including what's happening in China right now. My issue is always about the cost of transition to supposedly what will fix it. Also, don't forget, under the climate change system put in place in Paris, places like the United States might want to turn around and say that they're going to halve the amount of their global emissions in the next couple of years, but China can keep doing what it wants, whenever it wants up until 2030. So feel free to go and talk about them the next time you're blowing up about a lack of action on climate change. Meantime, netball could be a sport that Australia will introduce to the Olympic Games. When we host it in 11 years' time in Brisbane, it'll be our choice about what extra sports can be added. Now, the Japanese added things like speed climbing and skateboarding. Breakdancing will be up at the next Olympic Games, and Australia, or at least the netball community in Australia, would like netty to get its chance to be an Olympic sport. Its Sport came out today and said that they want to be first cab off the rank to be considered for that decision in a few years' time. We've got 11 years, plenty of time to work it out, and a very good women's team before then. Plenty of championships that they'll be winning. But we want our junior netballers to dream of Olympic glory in the sport that they love. Our sport deserves to be played on the biggest stage. Meantime, here is what the AOC has had to say about these. Oh, sorry, I should say, what am I saying? Not about AOC, the Australian Olympic Committee. AOC being the American politician. Now, she's a far left politician. She basically is, as Donald Trump was, the human version of Talkback Radio. She is the human version of Twitter outrage. She's currently a member of the lower house. She's asked about her obvious dreams to take a step up the ladder on her way to an inevitable presidential run. You can't run until you're 35 to become president, but you can run against a fellow Democrat to take his seat, the leader of the Senate, by the way, that being Chuck Schumer, in the New York Senate seat. Does she want to do it? Here's what she told CNN.
You know, here's the thing, is that, and I know it drives everybody nuts, but the way that I really feel about this and the way that I really approach my politics and my political career is that I do not look at things and I do not set my course positionally. And so I'm not commenting on that.
She's going to do it. If not Schumer, then she'll try and do it with Gillibrand. She will find a way to go up the greasy pole, representing an entire state rather than a sliver of New York. And speaking of New York, that sleazebag, that is Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo today lost one of his chief lieutenants. This person had been by his side during all of the Emmy award-winning COVID briefings. She said that the emotional toll of the past couple of years is enough for her to finally throw in the towel. Meantime, one of the 11 accusers when it comes to sexual harassment also went on television and made these comments about the governor, who still thinks he can hold on to power.
Due to the nature of the inappropriate conduct that the governor did to me, I believe that he groped me, he touched me, not only once, but twice.
And of course, the other part of the Cuomo story is Chris Cuomo, the brother of the governor, the one who was more than happy to play jokes with the giant Q-tips and all the rest of it with his New York governor brother. Well, he, of course, has had nothing to say about the apparent breaches of both state and federal law. He has had 0 seconds of time that he's talked about it while still being on the air. Now, of course, you would expect that CNN, now that the report is in, and it showed that their host was giving informal advice to the governor about how to respond to the claims being made by, among others, that lady that you just saw, that he might be for the high jump. But just like Jeffrey Toobin, the bloke who decided to pleasure himself on a Zoom call, well, it's CNN and they protect their own.
What really matters most is how CNN as a global news outlet covers the governor's alleged crimes. Now, I asked around about this all week, and I found absolutely no sign that Chris having a show at 9 affects the rest of the day. If anything, it's the opposite. Some staffers have speculated that the coverage has been extra tough on CNN because of the scrutiny.
Bullshit. Let's get into the conversation now with 3 people who I know are plenty fired up and ready to talk tonight. Pauline Hanson is here, of course, the leader of One Nation, joining us now from the Sydney Rim there in Queensland. We've got Rowan Dean, who's joining us from parts unknown. Wink, wink. In the middle of Outsiders Castle. And we've got Joel Fitzgibbon as well, who's there in Canberra, was able to make it for Parliament, which is back for another week. Now, Pauline, a late-breaking announcement from your good self tonight is something I'd like to talk about first here. Your belief is the Australian border should remain about as shut as possible between now and, what is this, right until next year?
Well, till the end of the year. What I'd like to see is that the federal government has allowed in Australia since last year 164,000 people into Australia. So work visas, these are visas that have been issued. 1.67 million have come into Australia since last year, but 164,000 visas. Now, if they're worried about the states locking down their borders, people can't freedom of movement because of the COVID. Well, stop bringing people into the country until we get it under control. So shut the borders completely, get it back under control, let people have their vaccinations if they want to have the vaccinations, open up the borders, give people back their freedom, and then take it from there and look at the international travel we're going to allow in Australia. You know, family reunion, we've got working visas of people coming in, we've got students coming in. This is ridiculous because he's lost control of the states. The states are just doing whatever they want to, shut down the borders, people's freedom. We've got more issues and problems that are happening with, as you said, Paul, last year I was told about people couldn't have their cancer treatments. People are dying of other causes because COVID's shutting us down and they're worrying about the COVID that possibly is a bad infection. Yes, it does cause some deaths, I admit to that, but what the impact it's having on people in other health areas is ridiculous and we're paying the price for it.
What about a fully vaccinated Australian who simply wants to come home to the country that's on their passport?
Well, they're allowing those people into the country. So as I said, 1.67 million have been brought into the country, but we've allowed 164,000 other people who've given visas to come out into Australia
so non-citizens
at that period of time. So we brought a lot of those, yes, we have brought back a lot of these Australians. Yes, they've got to come back. There's estimated probably about 35,000 Australians still wanting to get back here, but we're issuing visas to non-Australians to come here to Australia. And I say it's got to stop.
Joel, do you think that anyone who is a non-Australian should be crossing our borders?
Well, as little movement across the international border as is possible should be the rule and the starting point, Paul. I mean, our great advantage here in Australia is that we're an island continent, and that's kept us relatively safe when compared to the rest of the world. And some people, you know, have been allowed to leave to go to weddings in India, for example, and return. I mean, that is just ridiculous. And that issue has been compounded by a failure to put a decent quarantining system in place here in Australia. But I think the current exemption process is a legitimate one. You don't like blanket bans. There'll always be examples of people who have legitimate reasons to travel either way, or sad cases to put. And I think it makes sense to have a ban with exemptions, and that's what we've been doing. And people have criticised the government for changing its mind about expats coming back to the country, but I think they should face some scrutiny as well to ensure that we're only letting people pass over the international border when it's absolutely necessary.
All right. Joe Rogan, a hero to many of us and a bloke who certainly I love the idea of him just thinking out loud, which is always so good. He's got a great format to do it and the most successful podcast in the world. Rowan, I think you might have seen a few Outsiders episodes because here he is ripping into Australia's current COVID situation.
There's some crazy shit going on right now where the army is trying to keep people inside in Australia. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I read was that as they're doing this, only 9 people have died from COVID. Over the last, see if that's true. How many people have died recently from COVID in Australia? Because they have full-on government lockdowns where the government is flying helicopters over the streets saying, go back indoors. You're not allowed to be outside, which is crazy. It's like this disease doesn't even transmit well outside. It doesn't make any sense. Being outside and getting vitamin D from the sun is probably one of the best things you can do.
Now, Rowan, before the fact checkers jump up our backsides, 29 is the number of those that have died in the Delta variant thus far. And, of course, there are hundreds of cases still popping up in Sydney each and every day. But there's plenty of international observation, including, I know, Dan Bongino and others, who look at the Australian lockdown and go, what?
Yeah, well, there's the response from the Berejiklian and Andrews and all the state governments have been disproportionate to the reality of COVID. But we are going to get COVID coming here. In a serious way, it's going to happen. The rest of the world has had that. We've been isolated, as Joel was saying, and as Pauline was pointing out. So at what point do we recognise that, you can't defeat a virus like Mark McGowan claims. And the Prime Minister is hinting at somehow he's got some magic formula to prevent COVID ever coming to Australia. The only way to prevent COVID ever coming to Australia is to keep the borders locked indefinitely. I don't think anyone wants that. So the world is laughing at the fact that we're running around with, soldiers in the streets and drones and helicopters, when, as has been pointed out by Kerry Chant and others, you don't get COVID outdoors, or you very rarely do. And I think in Australia there's one example of it. So it makes the nonsense of locking people indoors. In fact, most of our restrictions are just over the top compared to the threat that is there.
Yeah, we've also had this scenario too, where, as I said, the obsession, and the media will do it every single weekend, where they'll scream about the number of people that are at a beach, and then lo and behold, 2 weeks later, no explosions outside the beach. We know where the problem is. Localised solutions is the answer. We'll bring that up again with John Barilaro in a second. So the IPCC report is out, as I mentioned, the UN report. I have not had the chance to go through it. I don't know what you guys have seen of it, but the media coverage, well, of course, breaking news over there on Channel 2. Doesn't matter about lockdowns, doesn't matter about pandemics, it's all about climate change. Adam Bandt, quick to his feet in the Parliament to rip in today.
Prime Minister, your 2030 targets are a death sentence for our country. Will you heed this warning and join the US and the UK by at least doubling our 2030 climate target?
The government is seeking to achieve net zero emissions as soon as possible. That's what we're seeking to do, Mr Speaker, and we're seeking to do that by using technologies, not taxes. Mr Speaker, we are seeking to do that, not by robbing the livelihoods of Australians.
And we have this as one of the people who are the report's author.
Climate change is a problem that is here now. Nobody's safe, and it's getting worse faster. We must treat climate change as an immediate threat.
Joel, how do we handle what will be the latest piece of evidence to suggest Australia ain't doing enough, but China can do whatever the heck it wants till 2030, and countries that have nuclear energy, well, they're allowed to lecture us when, of course, we don't have any of it?
Interestingly and predictably, Paul, they're already out there on Twitter tonight celebrating this report, celebrating what they themselves describe as the pending end of the world as we know it. And this is the folly of this debate. We all know the climate is changing. I think most of us believe that humankind is making a contribution, and most of us believe we need to take action. But it's really interesting, isn't it? I had a piece in the Australian Financial Review in which I made the point that we're arguing not so much about where we need to go, but how we get there. And if people are really serious about taking action on climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, then they will support every form of technology available to us, including, of course, carbon capture and storage and things like blue hydrogen. These are the things that the International Energy Agency has said will be necessary to embrace if we are hope to meet our ambitions and aspirations on greenhouse gas emissions. But the fundamentalists are on Twitter tonight rejecting all those mechanisms, saying the world's coming to an end. This proves their case. They're celebrating, and tomorrow they'll be doubling down and wanting to close down any fossil fuel-based industrial sector in our country, which would, of course, be a very, very bad mistake.
Well, and Pauline, none of them will be protesting out the front of their local Chinese consulate. Remember, China gets to do whatever the heck it wants till 2030. That's 9 years away.
Because it's a developing country, Paul. Don't you know that?
Oh, of
We've
course.
had all this time
With
to
an International Space Station.
do our industries and manufacturing and all the rest of it, so they're still developing. So don't you come down on the Chinese like that. That's terrible. The whole rubbish. Do I have any time for the IPCC? No, I don't, because they've set their own agenda and what they want to put out there to tell the people. Climate is changing, but it's not because of human interaction that's happened over the period of time, because you have 80% of the world is covered by the oceans. From the oceans, we get carbon dioxide. It either will emit it or it will absorb it back into the ocean. We've got the soils that actually emit carbon dioxide. People are only responsible for 3% of carbon emissions throughout the whole universe. So the whole world, I should say. So to blame people, the scaremongering that's gone on, I don't know which is worse, the scaremongering with COVID or the scaremongering with climate change. It's either one or the other. I wish, and then you've got different scientists tell you something on one hand, and then the others will tell you their version on the other. So it depends on whether they get a paid job with thousands of dollars and they're in a very good position, so they must go along with whoever they're representing. You know, this is just ridiculous where we are at this stage, and we are changing so much. Changes are good for the better, but when we are destroying our economy, when we are destroying our jobs and our, the future of this nation for those who are dictating to us, that I have no time for these ones that have set their own agenda because they're making a lot of money out of it for no good reason. We're going along with it. We're fools. And those who sign up to the Paris Agreement, they are different agreements, which depends on the country and what they're signing to. So we're dictated to because we have the resource of coal. So you can't burn coal, you can't sell coal, because coal has a big impact on the earth and the climate. Well, I challenge that as well. So until we come up with a resource, whether it's nuclear, whether it's hydrogen, or whether it's coal-fired power stations, we need a diversity of power. Power that's going to deliver a cheap, reliable source of energy to us to run our homes and our industries and our manufacturing. So until that time, my attitude is you are shutting us down from a decent way of life, but it's all right, let China go ahead. They're a developing nation. They can burn all the coal they want to, and we're not going to say anything about it.
Yeah, well, Rowan, of course, for the most reasonable reporting, I always turn to the Turnbull Times, The Guardian, where their headline says, major climate change inevitable and irreversible, report says. Their subheading says, not too late. Australian scientists urge for urgent action to avoid the worst of the climate crisis. So which is it? Not too late, or it's all over?
Well, that's a key point, Paul, and this is just a rehashing. There's nothing surprising in this report. It's not worth the paper it's printed on, apart from one key sentence in there which does point out that the modelling, because they had to admit this, the modelling has been exaggerated and hyperbolic ever since, for the last 20 years. Well, we knew that. And basically, without the modelling, there's nothing there. So that's why you get the Sheila you had on earlier hysterically screeching that it's the end of the world, nobody is safe, etc., etc. There's no science in any of this. It's just hyperbole, scaremongering, alarmism, and repeating and regurgitating what other members of the climate cult have said to each other. And it really, Pauline is right to point out how dangerous this alarmism is, because yet again we're terrifying the kiddies and we're demonising cheap, reliable energy, which is of course the best thing we need in this country and all around the world, particularly in developing countries. Cheap, reliable energy to lift people out of poverty. That's what we need to be doing. The IPCC is a cult. Of course, they were going to say what they say in the report, and it's very thin pickings in there.
Now, Joel, obviously Labor Yeah, you go, Joel.
Can I just make a couple of quick points off the back of those comments from both Pauline and Rowan? First of all, we never celebrate what we've achieved. We've reduced emissions by 21% since 2007. Correct. On a per capita basis since 1990 by 46%. But given what Pauline said about sequestration and absorbing carbon, can we just talk some more about forestry? We are a large nation with ample opportunity to plant more forests across our country to produce a renewable, recyclable product. Now, we've lost the plot. We are importing timber. We are importing paper. We should be doing these things here in Australia. We could be creating jobs, making ourselves more self-sufficient, manufacturing wood products into things like cross-laminated timber, which can be now used to build sky-rise buildings, and at the same time sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere. We don't talk about the Australian forestry industry or the forest products industry often enough.
Pauline, a quick response. More trees.
Because, Joel, why don't you go and talk to your greenie mates? They're the ones that are shutting down the forestries. They're the ones that don't want to have it. Have you flown over Australia? We've got many trees, that forestry. I fly over it all the time. So it's not more trees that we need. If you want more forests, then go and talk to your greenie mates, because they're shutting down the plantations and you can't cut trees down. And you're right, they are a renewable energy and growth that we have there. But no, stupidity says we can't grow trees to cut them down and regrow them again.
Yeah, correct.
That's your mates.
Rowan, let's have a look at the front page.
I try to avoid the Greens.
Yeah,
I try to avoid the Greens.
Yeah, we all do. We all do. All right,
job.
Rowan, front cover of the Spectator magazine. Let's get the plug in here, mate. It's a wonderful, wonderful read.
It's a great cover. It's that famous spoof on that famous photo of the cyclist driving past the dead guy in Wuhan, which terrified the world a year ago, and the bloke cycling past is saying, "Hey mate, whatever you do, don't get up. They'll think that you've died of the Wuhan plague." And the guy lying there says, "Don't worry, I won't get up, or they'll kill me." So it's a go at both China and the whole Wuhan lab thing and everything that the tricky games. There's a piece by Jason Thomas about the basically the psychological games that the Chinese are playing with the rest of the world.
All right, lady, thank you very much. Nice to talk to you. Spectator is on sale now. John Barilaro is the Deputy Premier of New South Wales. He also sits in the Emergency Cabinet. He's getting the small wins, which are actually going to be big for the joint, where local lockdowns, that's going to be the way into the future. How's that 24-hour vax centre going? I'll ask him next. All the way through the lockdowns and the rest of it, I've been arguing about proportionality. It's one of the things New South Wales got so right for last year. And still to this day, people say they're not locked down hard enough and why is Bunnings open? Relax. 7 weeks into a lockdown, 5 weeks into when kids haven't been able to go back to school, throw in their 2 weeks of school holidays and they haven't been in a classroom in 7 weeks. Now things are starting to pop up in the regions, but they're being locked down really quickly, so presumably they will only go for a week here or there. But it's been an arm wrestle and we've seen a change in language. Now presumably that's all been happening behind the scenes, where eventually when we can get to say 50% vaccination rate in New South Wales, then you might be able to start thinking about areas with those very low areas, those pink areas we've been showing you before, where it's zero or, well, literally zero mystery cases, that basic bits of life get to come back, and then when you hit 70%, that's when you can start opening up cafes, etc., and then it gets better with every point above that. John Barilaro is the Deputy Premier of New South Wales. He sits on the Emergency Cabinet that helps make the decisions here. We learnt from the Premier today a little bit of a change in language. I'll play her comments and then I'll get you to try to explain exactly what's behind all of those. Here's what she said about potentially doing things by postcode, not by all of Sydney.
I'm sure if you asked the majority of people in our state, would you look forward to more freedoms than what we have now? I think the answer would be yes.
So I'll ask the methodology that's happening here so we all understand and we don't get ahead of ourselves, John. Are we talking about 50% first jab is when we can start looking at that system, or it is just that 70% full jab before you can even start having those chats?
Well, Paul, the Premier sort of indicated where we want to go as a crisis committee. Yes, there's the 80% target, but what happens between now and then? And, 80% is probably around October, November. So we need to make sure that we keep the community on board. And what the Premier is saying quite publicly is that we have an appetite to look at lifting levels of restrictions at 50, 60, 70%. And that could be a mix of single dose and double dose. So the reality here is that we're now working through that detail in Crisis Cabinet, and I'll leave that for Crisis Cabinet to deal with.
I understand.
But I can promise your viewers there is a plan. There is a plan for the end of this period of lockdown, which is the end of August, to look at some opportunities for our community.
So there are people who say, well, how can you even think about anyone getting a haircut or anyone going back to school when there's a couple of hundred cases every day? Again, I point to the proportionality and the locations of things. So again, to those that will just scream at even the suggestion of things getting better for people at week 9 and 10 of lockdown, what do you say to those people who say full lockdown till we get to zero everywhere?
Well, Paul, I cop that on my social media feeds all the time. I'm under a constant attack that those that say we should just lock down harder than we are at the moment until we get to zero cases. And, that could be an approach, but if that was the approach, we'd be in lockdown until November, December. It's that simple. We know with this variant, we can see what's happening in Victoria and even in Queensland. It's very hard even to control small numbers and to bring them back, let alone the large numbers that we have in the community at the moment, like 64 today that are still in the community infected. So that in itself, with the transmissibility of the the Delta strain means we'll have more problems. So we have to have a look at an approach that talks about vaccination rates. We know vaccination is going to be the answer. So let's map the pathway. In one way, incentivise the community about if we achieve this target, these are the freedoms that you will get. And that's all part of the conversation we are having as a government.
So, about that facilitation of vaccination, we know there was that sort of special souped-up day yesterday. What moves are happening behind the scenes into things like what I've advocated, this 24-hour vaccination clinic idea, the idea that basically we know the pandemic isn't 9 to 5, so vaccination shouldn't be 9 to 5.
So Paul, you raised that with me, and when I reached out to Minister Hazzard, he has said that in some circumstances, we've already had some clinics at 24/7 clinics, those 24-hour clinics where the demand was there. We've then since, of course, have opened a number of vaccination hubs where the hours are 7 days a week, and that's been flexible, especially for those that aren't going to work. So the reality, like yesterday, a focus on supermarket workers, those retail workers. Next weekend, there's going to be a focus on construction workers. So in one way, we're trialling everything, and we can ramp up if we need to for more 24-hour hubs. And that was a conversation with the minister. So it is something that's already occurred, and I wasn't aware of that. And thanks for getting me to have a look at that. But it's there as an option that my sense is there's now this sudden race to get vaccinated, and we're probably achieving now 500,000 vaccinations a week, which puts us squarely on our projections of that 6 million mark by the September period, which is exciting.
Yeah, look, this is the thing. I'm sort of flipping towards the hope rather than the heartbreak side of things, right, which is important for everyone to be, and I want to make sure that we can be that for people watching. But also, too, I've just been thinking then, you would have noticed this too. There's a few sort of little local things that are starting to pop up, be they Facebook groups or little versions of apps or websites that are telling people where the last-minute places are to go and get a booking, get a vaccine because somebody pulled out earlier in the day. Again, I don't know if it's a conversation that Victor Dominello is having with the Service New South Wales or you guys having behind the scenes. You have this technology on everyone's phone where basically everyone's got the app. Can't we have sort of a vaccine standby list where we would know by 2 o'clock the number of vaccines that have to be used by the end of the day because, say, people have given up on their, you haven't turned up for the bookings, you can ping people and we can make sure that it's an active list rather than, 10 people didn't turn up today in Parramatta, so let's junk it.
So, Paul, of course we can do more in that space, and there's no doubt about it. Even on Saturday night, we were saying quite publicly that because yesterday at the vaccination hub we were focused on supermarket workers, we realised we still had thousands of spots, and we were just calling on anybody to take a booking, and even right up to Saturday night, you could have booked for the Sunday. So that's one part that we need to communicate that better. But you're right, through an app and through the Service New South Wales app, we should probably and can possibly do more. But, people are keen to get vaccinated, so we've got to take advantage, and you're right. And, I think we've moved from the debate about, if it's AstraZeneca or Pfizer. I mean, for most of your viewers who get a flu shot, I don't think we ever talk about what brand of flu shot you get. Well, the same with the vaccine. It doesn't matter what brand of vaccine. We know they both work. We know they are both safe. So we should just get people vaccinated, and we should make that easier. So, look, I'm more than happy again to see what more we can do in Service New South Wales so that people don't miss out on that opportunity. But I've been out to one of the hubs at Homebush, watching how they prepare, how they monitor the day, and so that we have no spoilage. We're not throwing anything out. And it's quite a sophisticated system. I think you're right. We could tap into that and make it more an external interface that maybe allows last-minute bookings.
This is it. Just a flat bloke with some ideas, but here to help. All right. Thank you. Appreciate it, John.
You're talking about you or me?
me. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, John Barilaro there, who is, of course, the Deputy Premier of New South Wales. I like that, being able to come up with ideas. If you've got ideas for this stuff, okay, we've got to find the hope over the heartbreak, right? And it sucks, right? Lockdown sucks. It sucks in Victoria, it sucks in Greater Sydney, and it sucks in those regional areas. So let's find ways to make sure we can do what we can to put that crap behind us. All right, joining us now for a conversation about lots of other things to talk about, none other than the wonderful member for Boothby, our dear friend Nicole Flint. And, well, is he our dear friend? Yeah, of course he is. Sam Crosby, who joins us now from the Labor end of things as well. You always love your intros here, mate, don't you? Nicole, looking $1 million as always. Now, what about this? Of course, Twitter is, 280 characters, I think it is now. But the ABC has to punch out 5-page document telling people not to be idiots on social media. Now, for most people in their jobs, if you say stupid things that bring the company into disrepute, the company can fire you. The ABC, of course, has a bunch of guidelines, none of which are ultimately punishable by losing your job. But we know who we're talking about here, award-winning reporters from Four Corners, all the rest of it here. But apparently what you have to do is dump references to the ABC in your Twitter handle name. Geez, that'll change everything. Make sure that you have personal view written up as a disclaimer, and the personal use of social media guidelines must be adhered to. Well, I feel like we've got peace in our time now, Nicole. No more cranky tweets from the bunker. Rubbish.
That's right, Paul. That's right. And all I can say is congratulations to the Managing Director, David Anderson, and it's about time that the ABC was brought up to the standard that every single other Australian citizen has to live by in their workplace. I think the question for the ABC now is why are they continuing to fund legal cases that are currently on foot, given that they've had such a dramatic change in their social media policy?
Well, of course, the issue too, though, is that what happens if you contravene the policy, Nicole? Basically, what? You get a stern warning? Nobody's going to get a formal warning on their job.
Well, I think that the actual penalty will be when we see these individual journalists personally pursued for damages, because at the moment, the ABC and thus the taxpayers of Australia have been footing the bill for defamation cases and legal cases that come out of some pretty abhorrent tweets and social media posts by individuals at the ABC.
Yeah, fair point. Sam, how do you feel about this here? About basically, you might get famous of the ABC, but you can't tweet on the behalf of the fame that you get from the ABC. Here's a suggestion: stop plugging their Twitter feeds as a way of pumping up their personal opinions on their screens.
Look, I think that question that you had for Nicole is absolutely right. The policy's fine. Every large corporation, every large company will have some sort of social media policy that looks kind of like this one in some way, shape or form. That's fine. I think the problem's going to be what happens when, one of their stars says something untoward on social media. Are they going to remove these, are they going to fire someone for it? I mean, I would have a problem with that. I would imagine you being the free speech loving guy that you are would have a problem with that, Paul, right?
Not particularly. Not for that mob. Not when you get your fame from being on the taxpayer teat and then they publish your Twitter handle on the taxpayer teat. That said, there has actually been a bunch of... I remember there was a case that I think made it all the way to the High Court where somebody who worked for the Immigration Department was able to tweet their personal and private views, yet still continue working in the Immigration Department. So I'm not entirely sure the guidelines are going to fix this, but at least it's sort of some bash about the backside for these guys and gals. Now, young people often, for obvious reasons, those of us of a certain age all turn around and go, oh, young kids these days, aren't they terrible? Well, let's actually take a moment to say how good are many of the next generation of people that want to lead us, including apparently a surge in the number of young people who have realised the benefits of volunteering. Now, I know in your other life, Sam, this is a big thing that you pay attention to, but obviously lockdown's dependent. It is good to see that the good old-fashioned elbow grease way of volunteering is something that younger people have worked out actually works more than clicktivism.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is something that, if I can just give a brief plug for Vinnie's here on the show. We had a bigger year for volunteers last year in 2020 during the pandemic, during the bushfires, with all of that crap going on last year. We had a bigger year last year for our volunteers than the year before, and it was largely driven by young people. So if you want to get involved, get onto the website, vinnies.org.au, and send us an email. Fill the form out. We have a dozen different ways that you can get involved, including even during the lockdown. We've got various things we can send out to your house, so you can come and pick it up, and you can do packaging of various things in your home in lockdown if you so choose. So get involved.
Yeah, I mean, it is that thing, Nicole, where you'd know plenty of community groups in your part of the northern bit of Adelaide where this is working.
Southern bit of Adelaide, Paul.
Southern.
Yep, absolutely.
Damn it.
And you said it best in your introduction. This is a triumph of hope over heartbreak. This is one of the very few good news stories out of a really traumatic 18 months for most Australians. And yes, I've seen it very much on the ground. You know, neighbourhood and community groups doing the Friendly Neighbour program, where they were putting little notes in people's letterboxes saying, hey, if you just need a chat, if you need some help, if you need me to pick up the groceries, give me a call, shoot me an email. I had a really lovely initiative in one local street. A young family made magnetic poppies to stick on people's letterboxes for Anzac Day, when we all had to spend Anzac Day at home last year. So you said it best, Paul, hope over heartbreak.
And when it comes to the geographical location of Boothby, I said it best when I said nothing at all. I apologise. Now let's talk here about in Queensland the slight confusion and I would say double standard that exists, where people who play professional sport like the AFL or rugby league, they were able to get away with it on the weekend, but people involved in community sport, no, not acceptable. She who must be obeyed is, of course, as clear as mud.
And you can't come into contact with people. That's really, really important. So if your sport is one that involves contact with other people, then it can't go ahead.
Unless, of course, it's a professional version of that sport, Nicole, and then you're allowed to do it on national television.
Once again, you've said it best, Paul. The Australian people, Aussies, hate nothing more than double standards, and we're not just seeing this through elite sport whilst, you know, mums and dads and kids can't go out and play their weekend sport. We've seen it through celebrities getting flown in to be able to do Big Brother or whatever it is, and of course the Queensland Premier herself being able to fly off to the Olympics when you've got people who can't spend the last, you know, days and hours with their loved one as when they're about to pass away. So it's just not good enough.
No, it's this thing. I mean, again, Sam, right? It is just ridiculous, right? That the professional people on television, they can bump into each other, but 10-year-old kids, oh, stop it, stop it.
Look, you're right. Of course you're right, Paul.
Of course I am. Good. Show over.
Yeah, but come on. Don't shut down the footy. Like, the Olympics are about to end.
I'm not saying shut down the footy. I'm saying let kids do it.
They're going to be watching this and they're going to say, okay, we'll shut the footy down now. I've been locked down for weeks now, yeah. Paul.
Sam, I think we can both agree that Dr. Jeanette Young, if she watches this program, watches this program and does not follow the advice being suggested here night after night after night. But alas, you can see, of course, her press conference tomorrow here. Now, China is about to have the next Winter Olympics. The next stop on the Olympic journey is back to Beijing, one of the first places ever, if not the first, to host a Summer and Winter Olympics. Now, we all know how amazing that Olympic experience was in Tokyo, but of course, Japan's a free and open country. Beijing and China has got worse since the 2008 Olympics. Everything from the Uyghur situation, let alone internet sensibilities and all the rest of it. Nicole, what should our attitude be towards the Olympic Games being played, the Winter Olympic Games being played in Beijing in next year?
Well, I think most Aussies, I think a lot of people around the world would prefer that it wasn't being hosted by China. However, Paul, this is a great opportunity for media from around the globe to shine a light on China, to really examine what life is like under a communist regime and explain to all of us and showcase to all of us the realities which involve tyranny and oppression. And it's also a pretty good reminder of how fabulous our democracy is and the incredible freedom that we enjoy in countries like Australia.
Wouldn't that be good, Sam, that, you know, when all kids have to do the at-home lessons when it comes to name your favourite Olympic sport, tell us the history of your favourite Olympic sport. What about tell us the difference between communism and capitalism and how it works, how Australia is a free country and China is not?
Now, look, I think Nicole hit the nail on the head. This is a good opportunity. I mean, I agree. It would be great if we didn't have this problem. If, you know, the Winter Olympics in Sochi didn't occur, if the World Cup in Qatar didn't occur, correct, if we did keep these major sporting tournaments to free and open countries. But that said, unless they're going to change that, and they're not, then I think, yeah, let's get the media over there and do a proper job. Show the wonderful sport and the wonderful city and the wonderful people, but also show the dark side, show the problems that they don't want you to see while you're over there.
Yeah, correct. But then again, we've just gone through 2 weeks where Russia, that was banned from the Olympics, was able to reinvent itself as the Russian Olympic Committee and ends up being on the tally. But of course, no mention of that whatsoever, wasn't it? And misinformation to talk about transgender weightlifters. Anyway, Nicole, thank you very much for the chat. Sam as well, all the best.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys. All right, after the break, we're going to talk to the Boss the Kids helpline because we care about the kids, particularly in the kids in lockdown in Melbourne, in Sydney right now. We're also going to have a chat to Jim Molan about how Australia has a terrible record of being able to buy stuff for all 3 branches of the Australian military. How do we do it better? Jim knows. We'll talk to him next. This next chat's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult, but don't reach for the remote. Let's all together have an adult conversation. You know, kids are struggling right now in lockdown, and there are kids that reach out for help. They literally ring the kids helpline. Well, some amazing statistics have come out of them in the past little while about the number of ambulances that they call as a result of the pleas they get from those kids. Tony Fitzgerald joins us now to discuss all of this and Kids Helpline's role in helping kids that are really struggling right now. Tony, thanks for the chat.
Thanks, Paul. Good to be with you tonight.
Mate, it must be heartbreaking for your staff, but obviously it's the kids that we care about here. 37 calls for an ambulance every week.
Yeah, certainly we've had a look at our data, and that's over the last 6 months. An average of 37 what we would call emergency interventions just in relation to suicide alone each week, and that's up from an average of about 19 the same time last year. So it is a concern for us. Obviously, kids out there are struggling at the moment. On the one hand, you know, they are struggling, and it's very disturbing to know and realise that they need that support. But I guess on the other hand, that's 37 occasions where we've had the opportunity to prevent a suicide, for example. So there's always two sides to this, I guess, but it is telling us that kids are struggling at the moment.
Absolutely. Now, is it true that kids as young as 5 are reaching out and you're in communication with them and they are in real distress?
Well, Kids Helpline is a service that is available for kids and young people aged 5 to 25, and certainly it's true that we've seen an increase in contacts from young kids as young as 5 who are reaching out to us probably around the kind of issues that impact a typical 5-year-old, but those numbers have increased over the last 6 months. So they're worried, they're concerned, they're anxious, and across the board, whether they're 5-year-olds or whether they're 15-year-olds or 25-year-olds, overwhelmingly, you know, they're contacting us because they're concerned and anxious, and we're seeing mental health presentations increase, emotional wellbeing and anxiety, certainly across the board.
Now, when we talk about lockdown, and I get, understandably, like every decent person, emotional about the idea that there are kids that frankly are being locked in with their abusers right now and have been for the best part of 7 weeks in Sydney, more than 100 days, of course, in Victoria. How do we break that nexus? Because obviously we understand why lockdowns need to take place, but how do we make sure that kids who are known to be in difficult homes aren't being locked in those homes for weeks on end?
It's a really tricky issue, Paul, and certainly we see that increase in contacts from kids because they're locked down and those avenues for help seeking have been cut off. You know, traditionally, if they're at school, they've got someone to speak to, whether it's a teacher or a friend or a guidance counsellor, but they don't have that opportunity when they're locked in their houses. So I think as a community, we need to make sure that you know, we're more aware of those situations, and services like ours are there. You know, kids can contact us relatively discreetly and reach out for help, and importantly, we can then get that support to them that's required. So it's a tricky issue, and you know, we all want this pandemic to end. You know, we want it to be over. It's a really unpleasant situation for all of us, but it is impacting the health and well-being of our young people and our children in particular. And I think the sooner we can get out of this, the better.
Now, I don't know if you can answer this question, so feel free to bat it away if you can't. Is the restriction on movement affecting the local, community services department in whatever state it is from being able to physically go and do the checks that they may have been doing in 2019?
Look, anecdotally, we suspect that that might be the case, and certainly we see that in the contacts that young people are making to our service because, they don't have access to those supports. So, I can't say definitively whether that's the case, but certainly what we do know is that kids who are in those situations who don't necessarily have access to the support from child safety or support from their school, they're contacting us instead, and the pressure's coming on services like us to help respond and support those young people. So it's quite likely that's the case in some circumstances, yes.
Now, I want everyone to write this number down, get it to a kid that they think might need it, or every kid should know this number. It's 1800 55 1800. That's the telephone number for Kids Helpline, but also their website is awesome. kidshelpline.com.au, lots of little graphics about how old you are and can help lead you through a process about how you're feeling and how kids are feeling. They all should know that service exists, and certainly you should be aware of it if you think there are some people who need it. Tony, you've got a really tough job, but thank goodness you and your team are there. I know that the pressure is through the roof, but thank you for what you do. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Paul. And just a special shout out to our counsellors. We've got a team of counsellors who are working in Sydney at the moment who are locked in their own houses as well. And they've got that double impact of having to respond to what we're seeing, but also the impact on their own families as well. And they're doing a magnificent job. So I'd just like to take my hat off to our team who are just working so hard to support our children and young people.
Angels amongst us, mate. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, mate.
Good on you. Tony Fitzgerald there is the boss of Kids Helpline. Seriously, kidshelpline.com.au, the telephone number 1800 55 1800. Lifeline, all those other services are around, but it's tough right now. Jim Mullen is Liberal Senator, joining us now from his home, not too far from Canberra, but far enough away not to be near any Greens. Nice to see you, Senator.
I'm nowhere near Greens, and I'm not going to mention COVID the entire interview.
Good, best to say. Now, amazing details in the past few days and summations about, frankly, how bad Australia has been at defence procurement. Now, we've talked about this for a little while, but it doesn't matter whether it's a submarine or it's a plane. There always seems like we kind of back the wrong horse. Can we just jump back a step here? Why do you think that is? Because for obvious reasons, it's someone's full-time job in the Defence Department, in the federal government, to decide, all right, this is the piece of kit, this is how much it's going to cost, and this is why we want it. But why do we keep making mistakes?
Paul, each one is a separate story, and the only thing that links each one, the Tiger or the Taipan helicopter or the Sea Sprite or the subs or the frigates, etc., the only thing that links them is our strategic confusion. You know why we suddenly find we're embarrassed by the fact that we're not getting the first sub till 2034 or something, and the frigates until late dates? The only reason we're embarrassed by that is because now we realise we actually need them. From 1945 until about now, it has not mattered because the US ensured our prosperity and it ensured our security. And we could go to war or not go to war. We could take something and go to war with that, or we could take something else and go to war with something else. Now it matters. That's the problem. So in the past, all of these decisions have been made by people and by a bureaucracy that really had no idea about the fact that we were going to take these and fight with them. If a shipyard, us having a shipyard in this country, is more important than having a submarine now, and that's what we've got at the moment. We've got good submarines now, but the future submarine, if it's more important to have a shipyard that goes out to 2054, then that's what you'll get. You won't get the submarines until the last submarine till the end of 2054. Strategic confusion is the problem that we face. We don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, look, and I get it. There's a little bit of a lead time involved in these things, but the idea that it always seems to be sort of 15 to 20 years to sort of get one or two and then eventually the full 10 within 30 years. Again, in the defence procurement situation, I'm not imagining it's like a car yard where there's dozens of subs that are just sitting waiting for insert country to purchase. But that said, there are facilities around the world that are further down the track than us starting from scratch every time, right?
Yes, there are. But when you look at just about any defence force, you'll find stuff-ups, and you will find quite dramatic stuff-ups. And I would balance all the things in the various lists that people are coming out with at the moment, with the simple fact that the Australian Defence Force has never been better than it is at the moment in the 50-year exposure I've had to. Now, that's a sad thing to say, that the ADF is very, very good. But what's it good for? It's good for what we used to do from 1945 until now. So we've got to get that change. We've got to change our strategy, dramatically change our strategy. And if you think the ADF's got a problem, have a look at the rest of the nation. The rest of the nation has a bigger problem in relation to conflict or war than the ADF. So this is why we need to change our strategy, and we need to have a totally new strategy which acknowledges the fact we're in a different strategic environment and we should be scared stiff.
Yeah, and just to make everyone feel better, apparently China has pumped up another 250 missile silos, all of which could potentially be somewhere where the worst possible weapons could be launched. Where's this information coming from? It's hardly like something China would be making an announcement about, but as we all know, that many opportunities to launch missiles in lots of different directions is truly frightening.
It is, and ironically it's coming from civilian satellites, which have extraordinary ability to monitor various places and are just about as good as any military source. And this should be very, very concerning to us all, because the Chinese recently made a threat in relation to Japan. They have had a policy for many, many years. They would never use their nuclear capability against a country which had no nuclear weapons. Well, guess what? They've made an exception for Japan after Japan said that the fate of Taiwan was essential to Japan's fate. And this is only several weeks ago. They've also, certain bodies, the Global Times within China, had threatened Australia with attack not by nuclear weapons, but by missiles with conventional warheads. So, yeah, at the moment, there's a 13-to-1 discrepancy between US nuclear power and the number of missiles that the Chinese have got. But as they spread this out, as they are increasing their ability to deliver a second strike. So there's no way in the world would the Americans, without extraordinary consideration, ever consider a strike to wipe out China's nuclear capability. It could never guarantee it. We should, again, be deeply concerned about this.
Anyway, how are you feeling, mate?
Well, I haven't got COVID, and I hope the war doesn't start tomorrow. But apart from that, no, I'm going well, thanks. And thanks for asking.
We love you, mate.
Thanks, mate. Much appreciated.
See you, Jim. How good is he? Jim Mullen there, of course, the New South Wales Senator, telling it to you straight, everyone. It's not like we're not knowing what's happening right now. All right, a little bit later, Jacinta Price will join us in the show. You can always send me an email, paul@skynews.com.au, and straight after the break, we're going to have a chat about how awesome those Australians did at the Olympics as we look forward to. Could netball end up being an Olympic sport? We'll talk about it with the bloke who's helped our team get to such great success. Straight after the break here on Paul Murray Live. Matt Carroll is the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee, and he, like many, is very proud of what happened over the past couple of weeks in Tokyo. And, of course, the monumental task of moving people back home is happening all as we speak, and he joins us now to have a chat about what, is a moment to breathe out. Matt, congratulations again on what was a magnificent Games and the logistics of getting everyone home.
Well, thanks, Paul. Yes, no, the athletes and their coaches, support staff did Australia proud, and particularly during this COVID lockdown, it's been very important to inspire the country and particularly inspire our youth. And we couldn't have asked for better from our athletes.
Now, obviously, there's expectations, there's modelling, all of those things that go into things. Because there was a big question about whether these things would happen or not, we never really got a huge amount of predictions about how we were going to go. But now it's over. Did we overperform? Were we surprised the types of sports that we were able to jag gold medals in? I say we, obviously they did it and we just cheered on, but you know what I mean.
I do know that. Look, I think people forget we had a lot of athletes in sports at the top of their game. The swimming team, the rowing team, the sailing team, they're at the top of their game. So there was always that opportunity. The difficulty over the last 12 months has been lack of competition, being able to get to places. So it's a bit hard to tell how well you've done. So, but Jess Fox, top of the game. Then we had the surprises around skateboarding and the ones we didn't know about. Because surfing was new, and we never knew how that was coming out. So, and then the final one, I thought the young fellow with the skateboarding, Keegan Palmer, he was perfect. And then the plumber from Melbourne. And of course, those two athletes in the decathlon, helping each other get round the track, Ashley Maloney and Cedric Doubler. I mean, it was a game. Yes, it had gold medals. Most importantly, a true sportsmanship and a great inspiration to the country.
Now, the fact that the Games were delayed by 12 months, obviously the entire point of an Olympics is to try to crest on the day of competition. For most people, the expectation was 2020, and then they got an extra year. Did we end up doing slightly better because of that delay, that we were sort of caught with those that might have been a little bit overcooked, a little undercooked? I mean, again, I'm sure that'll all be judged over the next few weeks, but did the delay in the Games help change the result for Australia?
Well, for some athletes, the delay in the Games, they retired. So, that hurt them. For others, they got over injuries. So, yes, it did help them. I think the most important thing we did over the last 12 months was provide certainty to our athletes. Without that certainty, they get obviously nervous and anxious. And so it's important to give them that certainty. That's what we did. To provide an environment in Tokyo of a high-performance environment, totally focused on competition. They didn't, yes, there were no crowds, there was no one cheering on. It didn't worry the athletes. They were there very focused on the competition. So, and I think that helped us. And I think also the commandery that arrived within the village put a lot of effort into ensuring it was a home away from home, because they couldn't go anywhere else. That's the only place that could go was the village. So, and to competition venues, of course. So that was very important to us. I think it was a combination of things. The good work by the national institutes, state institutes around the country, and the AIS, and of course the sports themselves. And always important is the families, the great support the athletes get from families, that unconditional support.
Well, I tell you what, one of the coolest things, and I hope somebody can have the chat with whomever is host broadcaster in another couple of years' time, presumably 7 again. I love the idea of all that checking back in at homes and little hubs on the sunny coast of everyone cheering. It was sort of this lovely old school feeling. Now, as you know today, Netball said that they'd love to be the Australian addition to the Games in 2032. Obviously, no decision on that for some time to come. Tell us, how many slots does a host country have to be able to add a sport? Is that Australia's call, the IOC's call? How does that process play out so we can deal with the 700 different people who want to be at the 2032 Olympics and start setting some expectations that Tiddlywinks isn't going to make it?
Yes, well, the way it works is that there's a cap on the number of athletes, 10,000. There can be no more athletes than that. Within that cap, there is some discretion to move. The host nominates the international committee of the sports they want to include, and they make ultimately though it is the IOC that makes the decision. So for these games, we had surfboarding, skateboarding. They put back in baseball and softball, and also then had sports climbing and karate. The French obviously aren't going to have baseball and softball. They've kept surfing, they've kept skateboarding, and they're putting in breakdancing. So they're the sports they've chosen, but the numbers are very low. I mean, even in the baseball and there was only 6 nations that could compete in the finals in Tokyo, so they keep the numbers down. So, to answer your question, that decision is not going to be made until 2020, end of 2028.
There we go.
That decision made.
Well,
so there's plenty of time for people to put their credentials forward.
Yeah, good. Well, I thought it was good to see netball jump up nice and early and be on the front foot.
Yeah.
Matt, good on you, mate. Nice to talk to you. All the best.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much. That's a bloke who's had to deal with an awful lot in the past little while and deserves one heck of a rest in the next little while. Matt Carroll, who's, of course, the CEO of the Australian Olympic Committee. Now, two ladies who we know you love seeing on a Monday night, and whenever they appear here on Paul Murray Live, they always put a smile on our face, and why wouldn't they, before they even say a damn word? Jacinta Price, of course, the hopefully future senator in the Northern Territory. In the meantime, the Deputy Mayor in the Alice Springs councillor in Sydney of City, and the lady who'd like to be the next Mayor of Sydney is that Labor to her bootstraps, Linda Scott. Ladies, hello.
Hello.
So today, news poll pops up, and the story is that Labor still remains in a apparently winning position if an election was held this weekend, which would be 53-47 in their favour. Preferred Prime Minister still remains Scott Morrison relatively strongly. However, apparently the personal satisfaction levels seem to be changing a little bit. But let me take you through the numbers here. Preferred Prime Minister still strong here for Scott Morrison, 49 to Albanese's 36, with uncommitted 15. As for the pandemic handling, what popped up there was a slide that hopefully I can put up on the screen here right now, where, as you can see, compared to previous times, it is down compared to the absolute heights of April in 2020, when we were locking the borders and not having too many cases. But that overall preferred Prime Minister fact I showed you before, and the satisfaction level seems to be something that people have their issues with. So enough of my garble. Let's just talk straight here. There's not an election this weekend. There will be an election next year. That election will take place after an extreme majority of people have been vaccinated. So, Jacinta, is your expectation that people will understand that, sure, frustrating 2020, frustrating 2021, but in the end, Australia ended up in a better place? Or have you got a little knot in your tummy that you're not going to tell me about?
Well, you know, I think it was John Howard who said that the only poll that matters is the election itself. And I don't think we can rely heavily on polls, as we saw obviously in the lead up to the last federal election. We certainly couldn't rely on those polls. And you know, I think the average Joe doesn't necessarily understand the responsibilities of between federal government, between state and territories, and certainly the handling of COVID differs obviously from state to state, territory to territory as well, and is largely based on what the premiers and what the chief ministers are doing for those particular areas. And you know, politics, it changes from week to week, from hour to hour, from month to month. So, you know, that might be what the polls are saying now. Obviously, they'll differ as we go along. And I think in general terms, as Jeffrey Blaney put it, Australia's done really well in terms of the pandemic globally. And perhaps that there's a side of that we don't appreciate enough, maybe.
Yeah. Look, my sense, Linda, is apart from the fact that we've been here before and all the rest of it, is that there is an election now. The election happens next year. And I tell you what, I'm not going to pretend the vaccine rollout's been awesome. I'm not going to pretend there hasn't been enough of it, right? But let's get to where this fight will be next year, which is that I'm going to take a slow vaccine rollout and a low death toll compared to the rest of the world, with hopefully an economy that can bounce back as it did before the most series of lockdowns, that Australia is going to be in a better position compared to other places around the world. That said, it's going to be a long time between now and when that happens. So the challenge for your side of politics is to make the distrust or the feelings that are happening now permanent. Do you think they can do it?
Look, I think I'd rather be Scott Morrison right now than I would be Labor. You know, Labor has very rarely won in the last couple of decades the federal government from opposition. And so I think the task is absolutely much harder for Albo and the Labor team, and they are very much the underdogs. He's obviously seeing the sort of Labor two-party preferred and the primary vote creep up for Labor, so that's positive, heading in the right direction. Similarly, Albo's personal ratings are creeping up, so heading in the right direction. But as you say, we've recently had our local government elections here in New South Wales moved from September to December, so I think it is very unlikely that we'll see a federal election anytime around then. It's very, very likely that the federal election will be next year now, and there's a very long time between now and next year. So it's going to be very interesting to watch. I think they both have enormous tasks ahead ahead of them. But I think you are right to identify that Australians' judgment about the competence of the vaccine rollout, Australians' judgment about the confidence of the COVID handling has absolutely been the dominant factor in the last 18 months in the state elections that we've seen. There's no reason to think that will not be the dominant issue in the federal election. And so it's going to be really interesting to see whether the federal leaders are going to try to take credit for some of the success that the states have had, whether the federal leaders are going to try to criticise and attack actually for also some of the faults that the state leaders have had with the national cabinet structure. You're not seeing this huge politicisation on sides of issues. You tend to see actually around Australia right now, oppositions and governments, but there's a lot of Team Red and Team Blue in the states that are acting in a very, very supportive way of each other. So it's going to be a very interesting, unusual federal election that really will be defined by the competence of the vaccine rollout, the competence of the COVID response, and how well Australians are at the time when the election is called.
100%, just 100%. And this is the thing, you don't view it in relation to now, you've got to view it into relation of where it's going to be next year. There was never going to be an election this year, despite some want and wish and all the rest of it. And the PM said as much even before all of this most recent round of lockdowns, which are a punish wherever they happen to be. Now, student groups in Victoria have said that they would like every student in Victoria to be able to have 2 mental health days where no questions asked, they can press the button, and due to the ongoing stress of lockdowns, etc., they would be able to bang out of school for 1 day or 2 days together. Jacinta, obviously I want kids to go back to school. I don't think any of this applies right now during lockdowns, but also we have to be serious here that there is a generation that is going to be close to broken as a result of the on-off nature of their education, the on-off nature of the stress that's around it. Doesn't mean I support the idea of get out of school free days, but what do you think?
Look, I think, before we had the pandemic, we certainly had young people thinking that they're not as tough as they probably could be. We had children who were concerned with climate change, and they were being used to fight adult fights in terms of protesting against things like climate change, and not generally interested in what was going on in school. So I guess it doesn't surprise me to think that there are some students now that feel as though they need that extra time off in order to cope. And what I'd say is that I'd encourage these kids that it's not just about simply taking days off school. You've actually got to deal with the issues that you're not coping with. So, they can call for days off at school. See, I'm a mum of 4 boys. So, my 4 boys have tried every trick in the book to try and pull the wool over my eyes. I mean, my youngest finished year 12 at the end of last year and had to deal with the lockdowns, and he was at boarding school. So he was sort of in boarding school itself. When the school was shut down, he was staying at a friend's place, and he strived through that. But I think the most important thing is to actually address those underlying issues, no matter who you are, but particularly if you're a young person. I don't think if you're truly finding it difficult, then I think 2 days off isn't necessarily going to cut it. You need to be able to have the support in place. Schools need to be able to provide that level of support for kids. Parents should be providing that level of support for kids to ensure they're able to go through as well. I don't know that they should, as it's suggested, there should be a mandate for after-school classes. I think that those should be choices for some kids. But if you're not doing too well, at school and you want to lift your game, sometimes you have to take those extra classes. And I guess it's up to the individual. But I don't know that, just having 2 days off each term for no apparent reason will necessarily fix it. I know there'll certainly be students who will take advantage of that, whether they need it or not.
Yeah. I mean, Linda, again, I think that we have to be really honest that there is a generation that is genuinely bashed about here. I mean, literally, we just did the Kids Helpline thing a little while ago. I'm not sure this is quite the solution, though, but what do you think about if your kids said, sorry, Mum, mental health day, I'm sleeping today?
Well, I can tell you, coming from, Sydney and the heart of the lockdowns now that have been going on for a number of weeks, I've almost lost count. If nothing else, the teachers deserve some mental health days here in New South Wales, because they are just superstars, I can tell you, as a mum who's doing homeschool with 2 primary school boys. I think we should really be listening to young people right now and listening hard to what they need. Obviously, I didn't grow up and have to deal with schooling that was disrupted like this. I didn't grow up in a schooling system where I had to learn from home. This is a really new, unique thing, apart from a couple of children that have done, schooling via remote bush access for a very long time. There's not many people that have actually been through this, and there's not many people that know what it's like, except for young people. So I think it's really important right now to listen to young people, to understand what they think they need, to understand how best they can navigate through their education system. Look, again, I'm the mother of 2 boys. By all means, they've tried to put one over me on a number of occasions. So, of course, I'm not advocating that we listen to everything every single child wants and give them absolutely everything. But I do think we need to recognise that this is a really challenging time, and particularly for children who are going through school at home. This is a really difficult thing. They've had to deal with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unpredictable change in their lives, much more so than other generations of children. And we should listen to them, and we should support them in what they're trying to do. And if children are coming together, or young adults are coming together and advocating for the kinds of changes they need to support them in homeschooling, I think we should do them the decency of listening to that and taking it seriously right now. And because it's hard. There's no argument that it's really, really hard doing school from home.
Oh, bloody oath. Tell me about it, mate. I'm with you. And, of course, I'm just watching a little one going through it, and it's just hard. I don't think I'll ever forgive them for what they're doing to kids right now. All right. Now, let's talk about the census tomorrow night. Now, you are able to go on the ABS website tonight if you want. You are able to get it in early. Of course, it's all about who will be in your house tomorrow. For Sydney and Melbourne, that's easy to answer. It's exactly the same as it is tonight. But already we're hearing that computer hackers are starting to have their so-called fun around the edges of this. There'll be, no doubt, when millions of people try to use any website at once, there will be problems, okay? But, Jacinta, I want to ask about places like Alice Springs and about how your local council, obviously not involved in the rollout of these things, but the role of what a census does to help inform your local council and all of the other things that you're involved with, being the Centre for Independent Studies and the rest, right? How important is the census to give us a genuine picture of what's happening in places like Alice?
Oh, look, I think it's really important, especially the way it's rolled out predominantly for a lot of the regional and remote communities is it's done face-to-face, and there are people on the ground who can take that information from particularly the Indigenous community in the regional and remote places. And it's really important to understand, especially in some of our remote areas, certainly from a local government perspective, how we can better service. I mean, Alice Springs, we are also a sort of a hub for surrounding communities. So we want to make sure that we're not just taking care of our immediate municipality, but also the surrounding areas that we sort of service and we support as well. The needs of Indigenous Australians in these remote areas, it's really important that census information is available, most certainly. And like I said, for a lot of those areas where people won't particularly have Wi-Fi in their homes or access to the online census form, that's largely done on the ground, and I think it's been going on for a couple of weeks now. The ABS came to our chambers and gave us a briefing on what they needed. Certainly they needed a lot more people to be working on the ground with them and getting out there and supporting them. So I hope that they have the numbers that they needed to get out there. There's, worker shortages right across the board, including, for what the ABS needs to collect this particular data.
Well, as I said, people watching us right now, go to abs.gov.au, fill it out now and avoid all the screaming and carrying on that happens tomorrow. I'm out of time, guys. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Jacinta. Always good to talk to you. Thank you very much, councillors. Do appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, after the break, we're going to have a chat to the people in Tamworth, because they are locked down right now, and a bloke who's got an idea about how to make sure that his work will no longer be locked down. More in a second. Now, last week, I kind of was rolling my eyes at Each Way Albo's idea of $300 for everyone, from, billionaires to everyone else, to be able to get vaccinated, right? But that doesn't mean I hate the idea of business or community groups or other people offering a form of incentives. And I like when it's local people who come up with this and businesses who come up with it as a solution for their workers. And Andrew Helmus is the Managing Director of McDonald Jones Homes, one of the great builders in and around the Sydney region. And he joins us now. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us, mate. So put simply, what's on the table for your workers if they get the jab?
$200, $200 Coles Myer gift voucher.
Of which they can spend in whatever fashion they want.
Wherever they like it.
Yeah.
Carton of beer, some groceries, some clothes, whatever they like.
Because for obvious reasons, your business, if somebody ended up getting it, obviously it can end up ruining all sorts of sites everywhere. Tell me about the logic that this early in the process that it was time to offer the carrots.
We've been thinking about it for a number of weeks now, how we could play our part. It's just a reward for people getting out there and getting the vaccination. Our business has been locked down in Sydney for, a little over 2 weeks now. It's having a significant impact on the families involved, our customers, the subcontractors. If the subcontractors don't work, they don't get paid. We just want to see everyone back at work, doing the right thing by our team, our customers, and our company.
Now, if it comes down to it, is it still going to remain voluntary, or that's a chat for another time?
Always voluntary. It's not you must. It's just a reward for their contribution to it. It's difficult times for everybody. We just thought we'd play our part.
Yeah, good stuff. Now, we heard a couple of weeks ago that the rules on construction had changed. Tell me, in the real world, what's actually changed on the building sites that you're involved with?
Lockdown, both in Sydney and South Australia, saw us close down over 990 jobs across the country. That has a significant impact on our business and the people that work with us. We're back open in South Australia. Sydney is, back open largely, but we're at 50% capacity, which probably on the ground means something like about 25%, really. Lots of our trades, lots of our supply companies are locked down still in those lockdown 8 LGAs.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, the logical thing is, okay, let's imagine you can get somebody to site. I'd imagine, as you say, you need a truckload of this, you need a barrow load of that. You can't get it. So you've got 50% of people, but just how slow is the building trade at the moment?
I think, we're probably running at about 55% of our business overall, which is, a pretty good result, really, and a credit to the team. But over if this goes on and on and on, it's going to have a significant impact on the company, our business, our team, our staff, and our customers. It's, and I really feel for our customers who is, their delay in their construction is going to be an additional 3 to 4 weeks at least. That's 3 or 4 weeks of mortgages and rent and so forth that they're not banking on. And we've got subcontractors and those families that, they provide for that are going to be significantly impacted. It is, it's devastating.
Good on you, mate. I'm glad that it's all carrot, no stick, and it's just get on with it, which is exactly the way you've run the business for a long time. Good on you, mate.
That's right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Do appreciate it. Andrew Helmus is his name. He's, of course, the Managing Director there at McDonald Jones Homes. In Tamworth right now in New South Wales, they've been plunged into a 7-day lockdown. And let's check in with their local mayor. Col Murray is a man that we've spoken to a couple of times on the show before. Col, you know Tamworth like the back of your hand. How are people going to go staying inside for 7 days?
Oh, Paul, look, it's going to be a struggle, but we're a pretty pragmatic bunch here, and I guess we just knuckle down and get the job done. Our community's pretty much been primed for this for a few weeks now, and it's almost been a matter of if rather than when. There's an expectation, I think, being out there that sometime very soon we're going to be in lockdown, and here we are as of today.
Yeah, and the poor kid who's gone public in saying they were the one who brought it into town feels terrible. And obviously, I hope that everyone appeals to their better self. It's a punish to be in lockdown, but as you say, it was going to happen at some point in time. So, is the expectation that 7 days now means it doesn't end up being 14 days later?
Yeah, that's it, Paul. And whilst we haven't got any positive cases in town, we've, that poor unfortunate young lady who's been pretty unfairly treated by some of the, those bold, fearless warriors on Facebook. for doing something that she didn't even know she was in that situation at the time. But she did visit a few different venues in town, and that's what's caused our health leaders to understand that there is a very real risk, and to come in hard and fast with a short-term lockdown, I think, which most of our business sector and our community, I think, will appreciate, rather than a slow and drawn-out result.
Now, obviously, you automatically qualify from tonight for the state assistance, the federal assistance, all of those things. But give me an idea about Peel Street, of course, the main drag in Tamworth. Obviously, no one wants to be shut down. It's a hope just for 7 days. But what are you hearing from those people who desperately need the foot traffic? They need people to be purchasing all sorts of stuff in the main drag.
Well, we've had a fairly good run across all sectors of our economy, or not all sectors, but most of it, with the ag sector, the construction sector, et cetera, going pretty good. Our CBD retailers have been pretty tight generally, but the hospitality and tourism, et cetera, we're a big event city here in town, and it's having a real impact. And of course, our brand identity, our country music, we've got a lot of country music performers live in and around Tamworth, and they're really feeling the pain, and we feel for them and really encourage our state and federal governments to look after them, think about all the little guys, and just how hard they're actually doing it, and just give them a leg up. They don't need a lot, but they do need a little.
Yeah, bloody oath. Well, of course, we lost the festival this year. Fingers crossed for next year. All the best to you, Cole.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Cole Murray there, no relation, is in Tamworth, where he is their mayor. Annalise Nielsen standing by in a picturesque location at the very top of the United States. She will show it to you next. Thank you very much for watching, wherever you happen to be. If you want to get in contact with me at any time, you can always send me an email, which is paul@skynews.com.au. If you want to see some behind-the-scenes photos and just chat in a normal way, not about politics, just say g'day, celebrate, all the bogan stuff that I love, go to Instagram, which is PM Off Air. Annalise Nielsen joins us now, our United States correspondent. We've followed her all over the map, and now at the very, very tippy top of the United States, where she is on her way to Niagara Falls. She's either waiting for Superman to turn up, or you got some news about the Canadian border, mate.
It's a big day here in the United States. They're opening the border to Canada, first time since March of last year that any American citizen can cross the border. But the catch is you have to be vaccinated. You have to provide that certificate in a special app designed by the Canadian government, and you have to have a clear COVID test 72 hours before you cross. But this is quite momentous and shows that Canada's managed to turn things around after a pretty slow start to their vaccine rollout, which was something you can see many Australians keeping an eye on.
So how were they able to do that? Did they simply get extra supply from the United States? Did they decide to let, like they did in the States, vets administer the vaccine? How did they do it? Because, they were slow for a while, and then they're sort of top of the pops now, aren't they?
Yeah, they've got bragging rights now. They basically took an approach where they bought a huge variety of vaccines, 400 million doses for a population of around 38 million people. So they're well over-ordered, but the idea was to get as many shots in people's arms as possible. And there was really low vaccine resistance. People got on board quite quickly. There was a bipartisan approach to the rollout in Canada, and that seems to have really emphasised things as well. But what we've also seen is just a certain comfort level with the Delta variant, saying, look, you've got the vaccination now. They've got 56% of the population vaccinated. That's more than the United States fully vaccinated. And so they've said, look, now's the time to start reopening things. And now they're being very proactive in trying to get vaccinations in people's arms.
So apart from seeing happy people, what do you expect to see when you're there a little later today, your time?
Well, after I've crossed the border, if I can manage to get through all those bureaucratic steps, we're expecting just to see life getting back to normal. What we've seen is some reporting around roaming groups vaccinating people in the community, so we're hoping to try and catch some of that. But just to see life kind of getting back on track, I think that's what everyone's hoping for in Australia. And there's this idea that if we get enough people vaccinated, that's what we could achieve as well. And it's obviously a very different scenario. In Canada, they had a number of deaths, over 40,000, but most people recovered from that huge population. And so that's what they're trying to say is you can get back to normal if everyone does get vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, when we talk about often, in Australia, we'll turn around and say places like the United States are analogous to this country. No, places like Canada are a little more analogous because, of course, that massive public healthcare system, same as ours, all the rest of it, right? So, yeah, the multiplicity of vaccines. We know that Moderna is now coming online for Australia to have 3 now. Should we have 75? Sure. But we're starting to tick our way up here in Australia. But the situation in America right now, and again, it all depends on which part of the spectrum you get your news from, right? But you've got this sort of stubborn situation where basically, about 56% of the population has been vaccinated, a little higher in some places, a little lower in other places. Despite federal mandates, even the Post Office Union turned around and said, no, we're not going to back in compulsory vaccination. It feels like the next 20% for America is going to be bloody hard.
This is going to be the biggest challenge that they've really seen in the vaccine rollout. And you do see some key groups caving. Teachers' Union's been a massive one as they look to come back to school, that now they are recommending that the teachers do get vaccinated and report that status. But the big change in this is going to be the vaccine requirements by employers, and incentives can only drive people so far. It's when you start requiring it or they miss out on key aspects of their life, that's when they're going to start. One of the other things that's been talked about too is the number of people that have had one shot and aren't getting their second one. That's been a kind of sleeper group that's exposing people, and a lot of people are doing that because they had an adverse reaction to the first shot and they've said, oh, I don't really feel like getting sick again, so I'm just going to put it off. And so there's a big push to try and get those people vaccinated. But this second wave is quite bad for young people who get it. They're ending up in hospital, they're ending up sick if they're not vaccinated. Younger people are dying. And so there's that hope that if those stories get out enough and people see it in their own communities, they will get vaccinated because they know firsthand just how dangerous this virus can be.
Yeah, I can tell you the thing that doesn't work there and won't work here. It's when people start demonising those who haven't, the yelling, the down talking and all the rest of it. It just doesn't work with people, right? Positivity is the only way to get people over the line, including being able to convince your fellow family members. Mate, I'm out of time, but if people would like to see you go for your own border run, she did it for Mexico, she's going to do it in Canada. Yeah. Follow her on all the socials and we'll see you here tomorrow morning on Sky News.
This one's a little tricky. Thank you.
See you, mate. Our little border runner, otherwise known as Annalise Nielsen. She is the Energizer Bunny. Good to see her working all the time here for us here at Sky News. Speaking of, the wonderful Gleeso is next with a preview of tomorrow's Pages Tonight. See you tomorrow. Ta-da.